Playing 5, 10, 20 in this first hand. There was a round of straddles. Everyone agreed that was kind of off and on, but in this hand, the straddle is on, so 5, 10, 20. We look down at ace 6 of clubs from under the gun, and we're actually playing 7-handed-ish. I don't think any more, maybe even 6-handed, but I think 7-handed. So normally, especially with a straddle on, probably a fold from under the gun, but I think 7-handed we can get away with a little bit, loosening up a little bit from under the gun. So I come in for the $60 raise. The player on my direct left calls, and everybody else folds. Flop ourselves middle pair on queen 6 deuce with 2 diamonds, and I think either betting or checking makes sense. Checking obviously for pot control, and it's tough to get called from too much worse. Only diamond draws maybe get peeled from some small pairs such as 5s, 4s, and 3s. But aside from that, the player on my direct left should have a little bit stronger of a range on average, considering I open from under the gun and he's on my direct left. So I think checking in the spot makes a lot of sense, and that's what I do before my opponent puts out a bet. He bets $90, can't go anywhere with a flops pair, I call. Turn is a great card. It is the 6 of spades, adding a flush draw on the board. It's a question of whether it's a better card for me or for my opponent. I think it's pretty close to neutral in terms of who's gonna have the range advantage here. Normally the lower the card that is middle pair, I think that makes more sense to bet it on the flop. The higher the card that is middle pair, I think it makes more sense to check it. But I do think I can have trips here, and I can also have some various other holdings that I can represent, such as flush draws. So I am going to lead out here. I bet $210 in this spot. My opponent thinks for a little while, and he makes the call. So I'm feeling pretty good about this hand as it's unfolding. We see a king of spades on the river, which completes the backdoor flush draw. And my opponent has somewhere around, I believe, $900. So he's got a little bit more than the size of the pot here. So I don't think any other size makes sense other than jamming all in. We are going to be up against some better hands sometimes, such as pocket deuces, maybe a slow played pocket queens, maybe a slow played pocket kings. Again, considering that we're 7-handed, I think he's going to be a little bit less likely to slow play a big hand from what would normally be the under the gun +1 position. There's also not that many combos of those types of hands, and let's face it, we're just going to chalk that up to a cooler anyways. So I think all of that is going to add up to an all-in jam. I stick the money in there, and he does not snap call. Feels like we have the best hands here, and my opponent goes deep into the tank before deciding on a call. So great news. We go ahead and flip it over, and my opponent mucks his hand. Sucks that I didn't get this hand on camera, because this was actually the very first orbit that I sat down and had only just very recently gotten my chips in front of me and just was not settled. Couldn't capture the action, unfortunately, but happy with the result nonetheless. Off to a very good start in the 5, 10, sometimes 20 game at the Gardens.
This next hand is an interesting one for sure. There is a raise to $25 from under the gun +1, which is a little bit on the big side. Seems like standard raise is 15, maybe 20 sometimes, so 25 a little bit on the higher side. Player on his direct left makes it $75 before it folds over to us, and we look down at pocket queens. We're out of position here in the blinds, so I don't really like a flat call and having to play these pocket queens out of position. There's going to be a bunch of flops where we are not exactly sure what to do. The downside to putting in a 4-bet, though, is that the initial raise, again, is on the bigger side, and it's from early position, and the player on his left puts in a 3-bet, so still pretty early positions, which means should be pretty narrow ranges here. It's a meetup game, though. We are in California after all, and I didn't come all the way out here to Los Angeles to just fold pocket queens. So I am going to go ahead, put in the 4-bet, test the waters here. I raise it to $210. The test comes back positive. We do not get the news that we were hoping to get. The initial raiser puts in a 5-bet, $420, the old 420 bet. The raises don't even stop there. The player on his left goes ahead and jams his stack in there. Now I think we have a pretty straightforward fold on our hands. Just gonna have to let these queens go. So after I fold, these two players get it all in, and it turns out they have pocket kings for the initial raiser and ace king for the player on his left. So it could have been worse, but we are destined to lose a little bit of money here. I guess we could make somewhat of a super nitty fold there, facing those very snug ranges, but I mean, it's a meetup game in California, so that's just not gonna happen. Destined to lose a little bit of money here. One orbit later, very interesting hand happens where as the cards are being dealt, I'm supposed to be dealt an ace, but it is exposed. So we do not get that ace dealt to us. And just as an aside, when you get a card exposed, that's just another form of variance, because there will always be the occasional dealing error, dealer error, mistake during the deal. This is a human game with human operators. It's only a matter of time before you have a hand that is either misdealt or a card is exposed. So again, that is just a form of variance. Don't go around cursing any dealers or your luck. It's just part of the game. So here is a fun example of all of that. Instead of getting dealt ace 7 offsuit or ace 5 offsuit, we get dealt 7-5 of diamonds in this hand. I raised it up to $15 and both of the blinds call. Flop comes down gorgeous for the 7-5 of diamonds. We flop ourselves a flush. Action checks over to me and I want to size up here. There are lots of hands on this board where my opponents can continue. Our hand is also a little bit vulnerable to another diamond rolling off, and we would prefer the board didn't pair, things like that. So I'm going to size it up here. I make it $40 to go. Small blind immediately folds, and the big blind thinks for a little while before putting in a raise. He makes it $145 to go. He's got $400 behind here. So all of those factors that I mentioned before betting are very much in play here. I think ideally I want to just go ahead and get the money in if possible. If he happens to have a higher flush, then there's no way that we're going to get away from that on a brick turn. So I would rather put all of his value hands into a tough spot, as well as the times when he has the ace of diamonds. Let's just go ahead and get the money in now. Don't give him a chance to get away for cheap on later streets. As mentioned, I just want to put all of his strong hands in a very tough spot, make him think we have the ace of diamonds. People don't like to fold in meetup games, especially the ones in the Gardens Casino. So I'm gonna go ahead, jam all the money in there.
All right, I'm all in.
All in, right? All in.
And he does not snap call, which is good news, bad news, because good news is he doesn't have a flush, meaning a higher flush. Bad news is we really want the money in now. So after thinking about it for some time, we're hoping that he does call, and in fact, he does call.
All right, I got a flush.
Oh, I'm drawing dead. Oh.
I announce that I have a flush, and he lets us know that that's bad news for him. He flops himself a straight, so we're able to get all the money in there when he does in fact believe he has a very strong hand, which he does. Just turns out he ran into a stronger hand.
I made the blood though, right?
Every time when I'm near Andrew, I don't think he lost.
He
doesn't need that ace of hearts. He doesn't need that ace of hearts.
Kind of a cooler situation, but look at what that variance, that assumed variance, looked like in the beginning when we had an ace exposed. Looks like bad news at first, but turns out we end up with a suited one-gapper that results in us stacking a player. And this next hand, the $10 straddle is on once again. We look down at pocket aces, the red variety.
Welcome to LA.
So, 3 ways to a flop. Queen 5 deuce rainbow. Fairly safe flop for the pocket aces here. Action checks over to me and I bet $105. Talked it over with 1 or 2 good players here at the game. Can definitely size down a little bit, can definitely check back since I only have 1 pair and we are super deep here. But 105 it is, and both players make the call. Turn is the 3 of hearts, which adds a backdoor flush draw. The big blind checks, and this time the straddler leads right out for $300. I think we're forced to call here. I think it's probably a little bit too tight to just go ahead and fold. It's not the best card for my range. I think this is a much better card for the straddler's range than it is for mine. It makes sense here for him to mix in some strong hands as well as some bluffs. Bad news is that we have the ace of hearts here, so that's going to remove some of his bluffs, some of his combo draws that he could have picked up here on the turn. But like I said, feels too nitty to fold, so I make the call. And the big blind, after thinking about it for quite some time, he folds. Turn is an offsuit jack, which feels pretty bricky. However, my opponent is not done firing. This time, it's the maximum. He fires $1,100 or so into the middle. Feels pretty not great. Doesn't feel like the best spot here to me in the moment, and I am not loving it. We have 1 pair here. Feels like the board should favor his range a little bit more than mine, as I said. Typical 5-5 player pool is not going to be overbet jamming on rivers as a bluff. Granted, we do have pocket aces, and that is the strongest hand ever created. Nobody likes to fold pocket aces, especially your boy here, but I decide in the moment to let this one go. And my opponent allows us to see 1 card, which we happily turn over, happily until we see that it is the 10 of diamonds. So that is painful. That is a dagger to the heart. We definitely have the best hand there, and that's a gross one. That's a tough one. He puts us in a tough spot there, and I actually wonder just how tough of a spot it is. I've run into this spot thinking back after thinking his hand over. I've run into this spot previously where there is a turn card that is much better for my opponent's range, calling out of the blinds, than it is for the initial raiser. And thinking it over, I think with pocket aces there, even though I have the ace of hearts, I think I should be closing my eyes and calling. I think he's going to be checking to the razor with a lot of his strong hands, expecting me to continue to bet, usually be continuing that line on the turn. So when my opponent leads out, maybe it's a little bit suspicious, but he does a good job of using his range advantage on that board. Gets me off the best hand, so kudos to him. And I think it's a spot that I need to look into a little bit more in my game. I think it could be a little bit of a weakness. And as it turns out, it's pretty detrimental to this session. If I make the call there, I'm probably up somewhere around $2,000 or $2,500 or so. Not to be, not so much. In the end, we get into this poker game for, I believe, $700. Cash out of this game for, I'm not exactly sure, but we make a profit of somewhere around $100, which is a big difference from what it would have been if we make the call there with pocket aces on the river. Kicking myself a little bit, but what can you do? You live and learn, you play poker, you host meetup games, you make some right decisions and some wrong ones. Turns out we make a wrong one in the end.